Good evening. I'm Adam Fitzgerald, and it's the first time I'm doing a live video in a couple of weeks, probably about a month or two. I haven't done one in a while. And the subject tonight is going to be a very important one. I think it's one of the stronger aspects of the lead up to September 11, 2001, and truly one of the most important stories regarding the uh, the failure to act on the information, which could have prevented, if not part of 9/11, but probably from the 9/11 attacks from even happening. And that is the story of Ken Williams, an FBI agent out of Phoenix, and the infamous electronic cable that he wrote in July of 2001 called the Phoenix Memo. And usually I give a couple of seconds so people can enter the room and come and listen for about an hour and 10 minutes of this discussion, which, of course, through all my videos, I usually link all the primary source documents and files in the description from what I'm reading from or gleaning from so that you can access this information and you can read it for yourself because that's how we can learn and act on information, not by speculation or conjecture or just baseless theory. Um, So hopefully everyone had a good holiday. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to those who are just coming out of their holiday aura. Usually, this is the most fattening time of the year. I gained about 10 pounds eating a lot of bread and stuff. I got to go back to the gym because, my goodness, my birthday, my Christmas, Thanksgiving, too much, too much. It's too much goodies. But yes, in regards to a lot of the information tonight, I'll be reading from the Phoenix Memo itself. Another source would be from the Office of the Inspector General FBI review, which was publicly released in June 2006, in which Chapter 3 talks about the Phoenix Memo. And of course, I'll also link my interview with Ken Williams himself. I'm one of the very few people to have interviewed Ken Williams, um, and you can hear from himself about the source of the information for the Phoenix Memo came from and the informant that he had, which was one of the most valuable informants in the mid 1990s at the time. And his name was Henry Allen. He was a Muslim convert and he renamed himself Abu Yusuf. And I just want to give him a lot of credit because he passed away in 2004 and he doesn't get any credit whatsoever. And it seems that history is a poor judgment of character when you're lost in time. And not many people bring up his name, and I want to talk about him tonight as well. So, to talk about the Phoenix Memo in its proper context, we have to go back. And like I say, in order to tell a story currently, you have to go backwards. Every story has a beginning point. And in the early 1990s, Phoenix, which a lot of people are not aware of, but to the people in this room, you are, because you're rather educated on the matter. Phoenix was actually home to one of the very first uh, Pakistan offices that was created by three people: Abdullah Azam, Abdul Anas, and later on Osama bin Laden, who took over it. And it was called the Maktab al Kidmat. From the English, it's the Afghan Services Bureau. It was an idea by Azam and Anas to build a office where they would help in the recruiting of foreign Arabs into the war against the Soviets in Afghanistan in 1979, 1980. And there were hundreds of thousands of foreign Arabs from all over the world coming into Pakistan, and they didn't have a recruitment office. Well, they got help from a financier named Osama bin Laden, who actually helped to build a number of these buildings in Pakistan. And over time, as they got more popular and more money came in through the CIA and through the Pakistan ISI, as well as Saudi princes who were sympathizers to bin Laden and to the cause, millions and millions of dollars came in. Now, the CIA didn't directly fund the Maktab al Kidmat, but through their Operation Cyclone program, I'm pretty sure that there was a trickle down effect that went into this office. So as the office began expanding, they started expanding in the United States. And one of the very first cities it expanded to was Phoenix. Now, there was no official office in Phoenix, but there were contacts in these mosques in Phoenix. And one such contact was Wadi al Hajj. Wadi al Hajj was later implicated for his role in the 1998 East Africa bombings, was a personal assistant to Osama bin Laden. And of course, one of the very founders of Al Qaeda is Whale Hamza Jalaluddin. Now, Whale Hamza Jalaluddin actually helped to build the contacts in Arizona and also helped to build the very first physical office of the Maktab al Kidmat in the Al Kifa Refugee Center, which at the time was situated upstairs from a mosque in Brooklyn on Atlantic Avenue called the Al Farouk Mosque. And so this center became the nerve center for the Maktab al Kidmat. And in the early, we're talking about 1992, many years prior to September 11, 2001. So you have this influx of Arab fundamentalists that were coming inside Pakistan. And of course, you have this nexus between the United States and Pakistan into Afghanistan. And later on, as Osama bin Laden became situated with a radical Egyptian group called the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, led by Dr. Ayman al Swahari, who was released from the Egyptian prisons for his suspected role in the assassination of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat in 1980. But he was tortured and he was released because there was no link to his assassination. He actually worked at the Red Crescent Hospital in Pakistan because he was a physician. And from there, he grew to, he was an associate of bin Laden, and they grew together because he saw the potential of using bin Laden's money from his father's construction company, the Saudi bin Laden Group, which incidentally has links to George H.W. Bush and his associate, James R. Bath, and of course, to their son, George W. Bush, and his oil company, Arbusto, in Houston. One of Osama bin Laden's older brothers, Salim bin Laden, actually helped George W. Bush and Arbusto and became a primary financier of the company to try and grow it. But for that, we'll leave that in the back burner. Maybe that'll be a future video coming. So, as Arizona became one of the main centers in the United States for radical Islamic terrorism in the early 1990s, and in 1992, incidentally enough, there was an individual who moved from Saudi Arabia to the United States to study at the University of Arizona, and his name is Hani Hanjour. Hani Hanjour is actually the first known 9/11 suspect. He's allegedly supposed to be the pilot hijacker of United American Airlines Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. And he went to the University of Arizona in 1992. There's a deep nexus of connection between radical fundamentalism in Pakistan and Arizona. And you'll notice that, over time, we always talk about New York, but Arizona is considered just as an important nexus with radical fundamentalism as New York is. Now, of course, New York, everybody remembers, is because most of all the terrorist attacks happened there, but nothing happened in Arizona. But you'll notice that there is a direct nexus between Arizona and New York in regards to those terrorist attacks. I just named two individuals, Hani Hanjour and Wadi al Hajj. And so, as time progressed, the growth of radical fundamentalism in the early 1990s in Arizona began to grow. Now, the Phoenix FBI field office is considered a very small group, a thorough group of individuals, not as big as a field office as, say, Washington, D.C., New York, or Los Angeles. But the Phoenix FBI field office is also one of the oldest FBI field offices in regards to the study of Arab fundamentalism for simply this fact that I'm talking to you about regarding the Maktab al-Kidmat connection between Pakistan and Arizona. Um, and this is where the uh, the connection between Ken Williams starts in regards with his connection to an informant who's actually an Arizona businessman who I mentioned before, Henry Ellen. Now, if we go by the Inspector General report in 2006, where they talk about the electronic cable known as the Phoenix Memo, the Phoenix Memo actually is just an electronic cable drafted by Ken Williams through the informant Henry Ellen, who's a Muslim convert named Abu Yusuf. Henry Ellen, a little bit about him first. Henry Ellen was born in 1948 in Phoenix, Arizona, traveled around the world, was the founder of US Aerodyne, and was a consultant for the company. He actually worked for MIT Lincoln Laboratories, which completed over 200 successful projects in 17 countries around the world. Um, and in 1996, when he converted to Islam and he renamed himself Abu Yusuf, he became the first man to broker a peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians, which lasted 4 years. He actually met Yasser Arafat, leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, in the mid 1990s, and got the Salafist Palestinian insurgent groups to cease bombings for over 4 years. He's the only man to do this. And yet you never hear of this ever, which is stunning because he has such an important aspect to everything we're talking about tonight. And yet he's totally forgotten about. And over the years, Henry Ellen began to work with the FBI in regards to reporting on radical fundamentalist groups because he was actually a peace activist. And because he was a Muslim, he knew that these fundamentalists who weren't Islamic, he wanted to get rid of them in Phoenix. And what he saw was during the mid 1990s, we saw this nexus of radical fundamentalists that were coming inside the United States after the Soviets were defeated in Afghanistan. Because all these radical fundamentalists who got training from the CIA's Operation Cyclone program through the Pakistan ISI, which was the primary source, the primary entity in regards to funding and training, and of course to God knows who else, intelligence services, Pakistan, the British MI6, Israeli Mossad, the Mukhabarat in Saudi Arabia, and God knows how much money these people got, how much weapons training these people got in the training camps that were built in the late 1980s, early 1990s for Afghans, for Arabs. And all these people now had no war. Of course, there was a civil war between the Northern Alliance and the Taliban in Afghanistan, but these radical fundamentalists that were later trained and operated under the umbrella term of the Maktab al-Kidmat and the Foreign Intelligence Services and the CIA now wanted to continue that jihad against who? Well, the United States. Even though the United States, through the CIA, but they had to go through the ISI, was helping these radical fundamentalists, they knew that, yes, we'll take their training, we'll take their weapons, but they're still the enemy. It goes to the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. With the Soviets defeated, the United States was now the new enemy. And who was pushing this? Osama bin Laden, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, and Omar Abdul Rahman, who is also known as the Blind Sheikh, who's leader of another Egyptian radical fundamentalist group called the Gamma Islamiyah. And all these three individuals have their mysterious ties with underground, maybe foreign intelligence, but it's not really certain for sure. There's some rumors from reputable people that Rahman actually was working under the CIA in Egypt. By the way, he got his visa in Cairo while he was on a terrorist watch list. And those people that helped him get the U.S. visa were working at a consulate, U.S. consulate in Egypt, and they were CIA agents dressed as consulate members. And once this nexus started coming into the United States, we started noticing a large formation of these groups in a number of cities, but the two cities in particular are New York City and Arizona. So Henry Ellen, who is known in these Islamic circles as a very influential and reputable member of the community, was now working with the FBI field office in regards to informing about them, about these radical fundamentalist groups. Henry Ellen passed away in 2004. Ken Williams actually has a very long history with white collar crimes, and in the early 1990s worked with the radical fundamentalist group in Phoenix. And by 1999, 98, 99, of course, he was working with his informant, Henry Ellen, who he grew a very strengthening bond with. And Henry Ellen was providing him information about this growing operation in Arizona. The FBI was aware of this operation because of their investigation into Wadi Al Hajj, who is linked to a murder of a Arizona imam, even though he didn't commit the murder. It was considered that the gun that was used in murder was provided by him, was provided by another individual who we know as Al Said Nosair, who actually was involved with the first terrorist attack in the United States, which is called the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane in Manhattan in 1990. And with this link, we have a link between the Maktab al-Kidmat in Arizona and New York City through the Al Farouk Mosque and the Al Kifa Refugee Center. And by October of 1996, Henry Ellen became a highly credible informant C1, which is the highest level informant. He began his informant activities in 1994, but they started ramping up in 1996, 97. In October of 96, Henry Ellen, also known as Abu Yusuf, tells Ken Williams that he has suspicions about an Algerian pilot who is training other Middle Eastern men to fly. Now, the Algerian pilot we know as the FBI reported him as Abu Sief, Sief, Abu Sief, in which Henry Ellen would later remark to Ken Williams when I interviewed him. He was told, quote, my comments to Williams was that it would be pitiful. It would be pitiful if the bad guys were able to gain this kind of access to airplanes, flight training, and crop dusters. And I told Ken Williams, you really ought to look into this because it's an interesting mix of people, end quote. Now, remind you the date. It's October of 96. What was also happening in 96? Well, there was an investigation into a number of people involved with a transnational, international airline plot called Bajinka. I've done a live video about that. I've done a lot of videos about that, and so has DJ Thermal Detonator. In fact, I think we're the only people that talk about this, as well as Tom Secker of Spy Culture. One of the best podcasts I've ever heard on Tom Secker's podcast was basically about Bajinka plot. And so very few people talk about this. And so this was also provided from the Philippines, who investigated this matter when they caught Abdul Hakim Murad, who was part of this Bajinka plot in which the idea for 9/11 came from. And so we have this numerous warnings in 96 about this wish for Arab fundamentalists to conduct flight training and to hijack flights and crash them inside the United States. 1996. Now, like I said, Henry Ellen had begun spying on the man Abu Sief, an Algerian pilot who was actually making connections with a number of people from a group called the Al Mujahideen. A little bit of background of Al Mujahideen is basically created in 1983, and its network is based in Saudi Arabia, which was founded by a Syrian by the name of Omar Bakr Mohammed. There's a lot of connections with terrorist attacks, specifically 9/11 and Syria. and that's because there's a wide range of nexus between the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda and their Salafist organizations. A lot of these people are gun runners, money launderers, and criminal nexus that Al Qaeda doesn't deal with. Um, People from the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood are much more complex and much more underground than, say, Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda is basically a bunch of ragtag fundamentalists who barely know how to read the Quran. In fact, they're illiterate. They don't read the Quran, which is the reason why they're manipulated into believing from their uh, imams, self appointed caliphs, oh, this is in the Quran. Meanwhile, they don't read. That's why they go to these poor areas of, the Arab countries like Saudi Arabia. They go to southern Saudi Arabia, um, Qatar, Bahrain, Egypt. Poor areas where they can, manipulate people. Poverty breeds extremism. Philippines, Indonesia. A lot of these groups exist in these areas. So anyway, the Al Mujaroon is a network based in Saudi Arabia, which was founded by Omar Bakr Mohammed, which is basically anti-ethical to Arab nationalism in Syria. And so the Al Mujaroon actually had a nexus in Arizona. And so this connection was led by an individual by the name of Zacaria Soubra. And Abu Sayyaf knew Soubra, and they both were in Phoenix at the time. Now, as Ellen soon sees the Algerian pilot Abu Sayyaf, he tells Williams that you should be very concerned about the flight schools and whatnot. So Williams basically says, all right, Ellen's been a good informant for years. Let's take up an operation and see where this goes. Now, at the same time, I was also told by other people that, Ken Williams said, leave it alone. It's not a big deal. So it really depends on what you believe here. Now, I know that when I've interviewed Ken Williams, he had some disagreements with Ellen. And I've also read through many sources that Ellen was a very credible witness. Peter Lance, the author of 1,000 Years for Revenge and Triple Cross, spoke highly of Ellen, and I respect Peter Lance highly. So I'm at a crossroads of was Ellen a really good informant or was he less credible? I happen to think he was a credible informant. I take Ken Williams' words to heart because to me, Ken Williams is a very credible FBI agent who actually helped the 9/11 victims' families in their civil suit against Saudi Arabia when the FBI told them not to. I'll get into that later. So I'm torn by it. So anyway, the FBI does open an investigation into Zacaria Soubra and Abu Sayyaf, but Abu Sayyaf actually it goes nowhere. Henry Ellen would later say that the FBI didn't concentrate on Sayyaf as much as they did with Zacaria Soubra. Nevertheless, their connection between the Al Mujaroon and Hani Hanjour began around 1997 because Hani Hanjour began associating with unnamed individuals who were later mentioned in the Phoenix Memo by Ken Williams. And I'll get into the names, which are important. Hanjour also trains with these individuals in the Phoenix Memo at flight schools in Scottsdale, Arizona. Now, according to Ellen, he doesn't know who Hanjour is. But according to the FBI, they had a case file on him. This is 1997, folks. And this is huge because you don't hear about this or read about it in the 9/11 Commission Report. This has all disappeared. Why? That's the question. Because it will show that the pre-intelligence of the FBI and the CIA failed to act on information that could have stopped 9/11. Straightforward. Not mentioning, Israel and Saudi Arabia's intelligence officers and God knows what information they have. I might even talk about the NSA and God knows the amount of information they got, right? I'm just concentrating on the FBI right here, right? They had enough here. They didn't act on it. Why? And we'll get to that in a minute. Now, several flight instructors who were later interviewed by the FBI after 9/11 uh, would note that Hani Hanjour and an associate carpooled together to train at this flight school in Scottsdale. They're known to share the same airplane on occasion in 1999. They're at the flight schools together on occasions. And this unnamed individual that's with Hani Hanjour leaves the United States in April of 2000. However, in May of 2001, the FBI attempts to investigate this person, but after finding out he left the United States, the FBI declines to open even an informal investigation, even with Henry Ellen's information regarding the associate, who we don't know his name, and even Hani Hanjour, right? Now, later on, the FBI speculated that this person may return to evaluate Hanjour's flying skills or provide final training before 9/11, but this is all circumstantial evidence placing this person near Hanjour, right? Now, the investigation led by Ken Williams really took a hold in 1998, and the field office in Phoenix began to investigate a strong possible Middle Eastern extremist connection in flight schools in Phoenix. And Ken Williams is the lead agent and initiates this investigation into the possibility of people from the Maktab al-Kidmat going as far back as the early 90s to the current time about learning to fly aircraft for nefarious reasons. But now remember, the FBI is known as the dinosaur agency, and everything they do is basically through paperwork and using old computers. Meanwhile, the CIA and the NSA up to date stuff, stuff that 10 years predates, whatever the FBI has. And because of the poor communication skills of the FBI and poor logistical skills, the FBI becomes unaware of most of the U.S. intelligence reports, even from other agencies like the CIA, regarding the potential use of airplanes as weapons, as well as other specific FBI warnings issued in 98, in 99, and in 2000. So everything's at a slow crawl. Now, at the same time, in 1998, there's another informant by the name of Orky Collins. Now, Orky Collins is an American Caucasian Muslim who later said he reports to the Phoenix office, separate of Henry Ellen, regarding Hani Hanjour. For 6 months that year, he knew Hani Hanjour. He reported to the FBI about him and reported about his nefarious dealings with the group Al Mujahideen, as well as his connections to the Maktab al-Kidmat and Al-Qaeda. The FBI would later acknowledge that they paid Collins to monitor the Islamic and Arab communities in Phoenix between the years 1996 and 99, eerily similar to Henry Ellen. Now, they both didn't know each other, but they had informants here. Now, he was also an informant overseas, and once, according to an ABC News report on May 23rd, 2002, he was going to meet with bin Laden in 1998. Now, Collins will later claim that he is a casual acquaintance of Hanjour, while Hanjour was taking flying lessons in Scottsdale. At first, he saw nothing suspicious about Hanjour, but he later would tell the FBI about him because Hanjour appears to be part of a larger, organized group of radical fundamentalists who are training at flight schools. And when Orky Collins went to report to his handler, different than Ken Williams, he would say that the FBI knew everything about Hani Hanjour, everything. And this is 1998, including his exact address, his phone number, even what car he drove. And meanwhile, the FBI would later say that Collins never knew anything about Hanjour and that they never knew anything about Hani Hanjour himself. Now, it begs the question, who's telling the truth? Is it Orky Collins or is it the Phoenix FBI? You be the judge. Now, Collins would actually say about Hani Hanjour that he was a, hanky-panky Muslim. He wasn't even moderately religious, let alone fanatically religious, and didn't think that he would be part of Al Qaeda. But he said that joining Al Qaeda isn't as hard as people make it out to be, considering that all you need to do is swear bayat. From the Arabic to English, it's called loyalty to Osama bin Laden. That's all. And go through the number of training courses that they have in Afghanistan. And there's a number of different training courses, which they surveil you and see where your skills lay. That's it. Now, on May 15th, 1998, an FBI pilot sends his supervisor in the Oklahoma City FBI office a memo warning that he observed a large number of Middle Eastern men receiving flight training, even in Oklahoma. The memo is entitled Weapons of Mass Destruction. And this is coming from an article which was basically deleted. It's News Oklahoma. It was penned in May 29th, 2002. News OK Oklahoma, in which it states that this may relate to the planned terrorist activity in Arizona regarding terrorist activities in the state and flight schools. So it wasn't just basically in Arizona, even though Arizona is home to the most flight schools in the nation, that this was actually what could be an interstate problem. So it wasn't like, in other words, it wasn't like you have this small group of radical fundamentalists training at one or two flight schools. That's not the case. We have flight training in Florida, which you all well know, with Muhammad Atta, Ziad Jarrah, Marwan al-Shehhi. You had Abu Siaf and Hani Anjor in Arizona. You had Zacaria Moussaoui and other individuals in Oklahoma and Minneapolis. So the FBI is, in 98, 99, trying to say, hey, wait a minute, we got a problem here. And we have a number of whistleblowers that did come out and basically tried to warn the FBI, their superiors, and basically no one listened until it was much too late. Now, a little bit about Ken Williams. Like I said, he's a special agent from Phoenix. He joined the FBI in 1990 and was assigned to the Phoenix division, where he worked a couple of years with white-collar matters, and since then worked on international terrorism matters in the mid-1990s. And through his informant, Henry Yellen, began to collect information about Zacaria Soubra. Zacaria Soubra was a part of the Al-Mujahroon group, and when Ken Williams went to interview Zacaria Soubra in 99, he went to his house, and the first thing he saw were these pictures of Osama bin Laden and Omar Abdel Rahman. And Soubra played the part perfectly. He said he hated the United States, that he wished that a terrorist attack of major proportions would happen to the United States, that he would participate in terrorist activity, that he would kill Americans for their one-sided policies with Israel against the Palestinians. And he's saying this to two FBI agents, one of them being Ken Williams. Ken Williams walked away from that interview and basically said, holy crap, this guy's a fundamentalist right in front of our faces. Now, according to Ken Williams, right about this time, he's pulled off the case out of the blue. He's actually told to investigate an arsonist that was happening to commit fires in the mountains in Arizona. I didn't know any of this until he told me when I interviewed him. And so now this investigation into this network, this growing network, finally goes ignored. Now, you'll have to say to yourself, and I won't blame you here, if you basically say, wow, that's really suspicious, was it because Ken Williams was getting too close to investigating these individuals and that they put him on this arson case when they could have, possibly put any agent onto it? And why Ken Williams? Now, one of the reasons is that the Phoenix FBI office was not getting proper funding for this unit investigating Arab fundamentalism. Because, like I said, besides their connection to the Maktab al Kidmat in the early 90s, nothing was really going on there, as opposed to what was going on in New York. So maybe they didn't get enough funding. I don't know what it was. Bureaucracy, who knows? Conspiracy, maybe. I don't throw it out the window. But, that was the end of Ken Williams until uh, 2000, when he's back um, investigating the case. Now, in this time period, Williams began drafting all the information he collected from Henry Ellen, his informant, into a draft memo, which was later called the Phoenix Memo. And it had a lot of information regarding subjects that were suspected of having links with bin Laden and the Al Mujahideen group, the group based that was created by Assyria, which has connections to Saudi Arabia. So in the year of 2000, he's drafting up this information. And basically, Henry Ellen is giving him a plethora of information regarding a number of subjects. Now, the memo itself was released on July 10th, 2001, and it was released to not the entire FBI headquarters network. It was actually only drafted to at least 13 FBI officials, one of them being John O'Neill, who's head of the bin Laden unit in New York, another to Dave Frasca, the Radical Fundamentalist Unit in Minnesota, and other names were actually omitted out. Now, the Phoenix Memo I will provide in the description for you to read. And the Phoenix Memo reads something like this. The details are like this. The purpose of this communication is to advise the Bureau and New York of the possibility of a coordinated effort by Osama bin Laden to send students to the United States to attend civil aviation universities and colleges. Phoenix has observed an inordinate number of individuals of investigative interest who are attending or who have attended civil aviation universities and colleges to the state of Arizona. Remember, Honey Hanjo went to the University of Arizona. The inordinate number of these individuals attending these types of schools and fatwas issued by the Al Mujahideen group, and there's a long redaction, an ardent supporter of Osama bin Laden, gives reason to believe that a coordinated effort is underway to establish a cadre of individuals who will one day be working in the civil aviation community around the world. These individuals will be in a position in the future to conduct terrorist activity against civil aviation targets. Remind you, this is July 10, 2001, 2 months prior to 9/11. Phoenix believes that the FBI should accumulate a listing of civil aviation universities and colleges around the country. FBI field offices with these types of schools in their area should establish appropriate liaison. FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. should discuss this matter with other elements of the U.S. intelligence community and task the community for any information that supports Phoenix suspicions. FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. should consider seeking the necessary authority to obtain visa information from the United States Department of Immigration on individuals obtaining visas to attend these types of schools and notify the appropriate FBI field office when these individuals are scheduled to arrive in their area of responsibility. And then later on, it tells you about certain individuals like Zacaria Soubra, and there's a long redaction. There's a number of groups that are named in this Phoenix Memo: Jamaat el-Muslimin, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Algerian Salvation Front. Now, whether Hamas or Hezbollah had indirect connections to a number of these individuals could very well be, but they were not part of the 9/11 attacks. There's no evidence to suggest that they were at the current time. Zacaria Soubra signed a fatwa in February 98. The fatwa was a jihad against the United States and British government, their armies, their interests, the airports, and in the Phoenix Memo, airports is underlined in black. And instructions on how to conduct these terrorist attacks. And it has been given because of the U.S. and British aggression against Muslims and the Muslim land of Iraq. That's the 1990 Gulf War. We confirmed that the only Islamic fatwa against this aggression is pointing to a much larger network based in Afghanistan, supported by Saudi Arabia. And like I said, I'll leave the Phoenix Memo, the link to it at the bottom of the description. Now, when Williams identified the connections of these individuals, he notified them as subjects, but it was surrounded on the individual Zacaria Soubra. His name is actually redacted. But when I interviewed Ken Williams, he said it was centered around Soubra. And basically, a lot of these people have connections to the Maktab al-Kinamat, the Al-Mujahideen, and Afghanistan. And there's connections within this network inside the United States. So in other words, what I'm telling you is this, is that there wasn't a lack of information that could have stopped 9/11 or could have stopped like the 1990 East Africa bombings. There was an overflowing of information. And I'm only talking about the FBI here. And you could go back to the other live interviews or live videos I've done regarding the CIA, the NSA. When you put it all together, we had so much information, actionable intelligence, that I'm convinced we could have stopped 9/11 from happening, from even happening. If everybody was working on the same page, and if everybody wasn't, withholding information for whatever reason. And of course, with Israel and Saudi Arabia, who I think even has more pertinent information, considering that their skills are in the act of espionage, meaning that they could pull off what the CIA can't do, what the FBI can't do, and that is to look and sound like a terrorist. There's a group actually in Israel. The name escapes me. I think I have to cheat. Got the name of the group, Israel Intelligence Group, that actually is a very covert group. I'm sorry, it's called the Mr. Avrim. The Mr. Avrim is a unit, a very small unit, which could concentrate on counterterrorism. It's a unit of the Israeli Defense Force, and they operate undercover. And these units specifically train in assimilating among the local Arab populations in Gaza. They are commonly tasked with performing intelligence gathering. That's all. They don't act on it. And sometimes these classes, they have to learn the language, either Farsi, Arabic. They have to similarly learn the culture so they can assimilate within the populations. maybe even a shader, darker brown to help with the mixture of these communities. And what they do is sometimes they'll spend years collecting information. And what they do is they report back about maybe connections with Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad or whatever. But who knows that maybe the Israeli intelligence forces inside the United States could have been part of that group outside of Israel that's simulates the Mr. Arvim? I don't know. But in order to, um, I guess, infiltrate Al Qaeda, you would need somebody from the Middle East who can actually mix in and part with that culture and speak the language. Like I said, the FBI at the time and the CIA lacked Arabic speaking people. In fact, in New York, there was only, I think, according to John O'Neill, there was 3 people that spoke Arabic in New York, which is the lead agency in regards to counterintelligence. And he complained for years that the FBI should have hired more Arab linguists because of the growing problem of Arab fundamentalism, but they didn't do it. And they did the CIA. So when the memo was released, automatically, hardly anyone read it. John O'Neill read it, but it was never passed to the acting director of the FBI, Thomas Picard, who later Robert Mueller succeeded as director. According to Dave Frasca, he neglected the cable and said that it wasn't important enough. There was no actionable intelligence. And to make matters even worse, the president, George W. Bush, didn't even know of its existence until May of 2002. So the information, which is gleaned off an informant, a number of informants, and of course, a number of intelligence briefings and reports that coincided with reports coming out of Minnesota, Oklahoma, and New York City, and Chicago under an FBI agent named Robert Wright Jr. and Vogel Betrayal. You have a number of these FBI agents who are giving briefings say, hey, wait a minute. There's Arab fundamentalists who have connections with bin Laden and other fundamentalist groups like the Al Mujahideen in Saudi Arabia who are training at flight schools. And we never seen anything like this before. These people have terrorist connections. We want to surveil these people. We need to ask the Office of Immigration and Naturalization Services to conduct background checks on these people. None of this happened. None of this happened. Nothing happened. And when the Phoenix Memo made their 4 recommendations that the FBI should accumulate a listing of civil aviation universities by these individuals, that the FBI field officers with these type of schools in the area should establish appropriate liaison with each other and with the schools, that FBI headquarters should discuss the matter with elements of other intelligence communities, and that the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. should consider seeking the authority to obtain visa information from the Department of State on individuals who have connections with Al Mujahideen, Al Qaeda, and bin Laden. None of this happened. Later, Ken Williams, who was interviewed by the Office of Inspector General, told the OIG that his prior experience didn't involve bin Laden or Al Qaeda, but instead centered on another terrorist organization, which was the Al Mujahideen and Zacaria Soubra, who had connections with bin Laden and Saudi Arabia. And that the unit, other than the bin Laden unit in FBI headquarters, was involved. He said that he was therefore not familiar with the personnel in other units, except for the one long-time radical fundamentalist unit in New York. So nobody even got back to Ken Williams. In other words, Nobody even bothered to coordinate with Ken Williams to say, "Hey, that's pretty interesting. Could you pass on, this information where you got it from? Maybe we could look into it. Maybe we have a problem." Nobody got back there. Nobody. It was stunning. Now, again, from the FBI's Office of Inspector General report, Ken Williams told the OIG that in the electronic cable, the Phoenix Memo, he was putting forth an investigative theory about bin Laden sending students to attend civil aviation schools, ultimately to conduct terrorist activity against civil aviation targets. Now, this ain't a theory. Now, if you remember, this is actually echoed by none other than Abdul Hakim Murad in the Bajinka file when he was interviewed by the Philippines investigator Rodolfo Mendoza in 96, when he basically said that another part of the Bajinka plot was that 10 planes would be hijacked. Not one, not two, not three, 10. And that there were sleeper cells inside the United States. This is 96, everybody. So Ken Williams had a hunch. What's the theory? He didn't just make it out of the blue. He knew. He was right that there was a nexus of radical fundamentals inside the state of Arizona, specifically in Phoenix and in Scottsdale, training at flight schools, while other extremists like Abu Sayyaf were basically acting as conduit, and Zacaria Soubra, who were acting as authority figures, and God knows who they were getting their orders from. And what Ken Williams was seeking was analytical product or feedback in response to that theory. And he said that he was basing the theory on almost 10 years of experience in international terrorism cases, along with his informant, Henry Allen, and his knowledge that Al Qaeda had a long term presence in Arizona that goes back to 1992 to the Maktab al Kitabat, which was taken over when Azam was killed and Osama bin Laden and Dr. Ayman al Zawahiri took over. He said he had learned in squad meetings that a number of individuals named in the Phoenix Memo, a number of subjects, would come across the world to study aircraft maintenance inside the United States and stay there for years at a time. And most of these individuals had either nefarious indirect and direct affiliations with groups like Al Qaeda and Al Mujahideen. This information was not acted upon. When Williams got back from the arson investigation case, it was June 2001. By then, it was too late. He had to rush up, correct the draft, and send out the draft a month later, which was 2 months prior to the date on September 11, 2001. And although the Phoenix Memo was drafted on July 10th, 2001, the Phoenix Division did not upload the electronic cable into the ACS until the afternoon of July 27th, 2001. The ACS is the Automated Case Support System. The For those who don't know, of course, the Automated Case Support System maintains records related to FBI's investigations, other intelligence, and administrative activities. And the ACS records actually show that because of the case designation listed on the Phoenix Memo, the lead for FBI headquarters was initially routed electronically through the ITOS electronic routing table. And the The problem lies with a mixture of malfeasance and an unwillingness to work with one another. And also with these FBI whistleblowers like Ken Williams or Robert Wright in Chicago or Mark Rossini at Alex Station, they tried to tell their superiors about this information. They were ignored for one reason or another. Did anybody in the FBI, superiors anyway, take Arab fundamentalism seriously? If not, why not? And so 2 months later, what happens? September 11, 2001 happens. When all this information that I shared with you today could have basically stopped the 9/11 attacks from happening. Later on, Ken Williams basically retires from the agency, and he's actually working with a law firm, Creedler and Creedler, who's helping some of the 9/11 victims' families to secure a civil lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The FBI told Ken Williams specifically not to help with the investigation. Let me repeat that. The Department of Justice, who works and serves for the American people, told one of its agents not to help with the victims' families in their civil lawsuit against a foreign nation, Saudi Arabia, who has links to terrorism and to the 9/11 attacks. And if you ain't basically jumping in your seat asking why not, then you're dead inside. Well, when Williams retired from the FBI, he basically came out and started helping the victims' families and Creedler and Creedler. He actually even went down to Guantanamo Bay. When I interviewed him, basically he claims to think that the FBI, that the U.S. government is actually going to make a backdoor deal with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the Guantanamo 5 suspects involved with 9/11 attacks in taking the death penalty off the table. But in return, they all got to plead guilty to 9/11. If that happens, the worst thing happens. We'll never know what the government has for information, evidence, and more importantly, what they didn't have. Now remember, all these people are tortured. Their admissions of guilt, whether it's true or not, can't be definitively known. Maybe that was the reason why they tortured them in the first place, because we're always going to be left with the question of, was it really true that they were actually the orchestrators of 9/11? And because they were tortured and they agreed to it, do you really believe them? So you're left in a state of paralysis. And so this connection between Arizona and New York and the 9/11 attacks is one strong symmetry that dates back to 1992 and even earlier, through the Afghan nexus of Arab fundamentalism, through the Pakistan ISI and CIA program Operation Encore, in which millions and millions of dollars went from the CIA to the Pakistan ISI to train these people, to help them become more fervent and more militant and more ready to wage a war that would replace an old enemy in the Cold War with a new enemy, radical fundamentalism. At least that's my theory. Does that make any sense for you? Let me hear it in the comments. So I could end it right there. I could take questions if you want. There's 10 people in here. Otherwise, I could probably end it here. And I'll just give it a second. The interesting note about the Phoenix Memo, in 2002, Colleen Raleigh worked as a legal counsel for the FBI, wrote a scathing letter to Robert Mueller, the director, and basically said that, Minneapolis and Phoenix and New York and Oklahoma and Chicago, all these warnings were ignored, and the FBI superiors didn't act on it. And basically, Mueller actually apologized for this. Now, according to the FBI's own Inspector General reports, they basically laid the blame not on malfeasance from the CIA, but malfeasance from their own agents. And meanwhile, some of these agents were actually whistleblowers, legit whistleblowers. That means they blew the whistle on information and got in trouble for it. And Ken Williams basically, drafted this memo and later on was told not to help with the victims' families. Mark Rossini, basically tried to warn about, the non-sharing of information, and he was told by the CIA they'll threaten him with jail. Um, Robert Wright Jr., found out this, big connection with Hamas and Al Qaeda inside the United States, and basically he was nuts. Nobody remembers these names anymore. Question by Joseph Hill. Who was the highest level FBI superiors who had access to the memo? Did Tom Wilshire have anything to do with blocking it? No. Tom Wilshire was not aware of the Phoenix memo, was not drafted to him. Nobody from the CIA was aware of the memo. In fact, the CIA basically said that the memo was never shared with them. Now, there is rumor that the memo was aware to the CIA after the fact, but not to the CIA. The CIA was not named in the memo. And in the redacted, which you'll see because I provide in the description, in the Phoenix memo, you'll see the INS and SSA. The SSA is Special Agent in Charge. That's the FBI. They don't have that in the CIA. So, who's the highest level FBI superior? It would be now. Of course, I don't know all the names, but would it be John O'Neill? No, it'd be Dave Frasca. Dave Frasca is the associate director of the Radical Fundamentalist Unit in Minnesota. John O'Neill is head of the counterterrorism Bin Laden unit in New York. But according to credentials, Frasca is higher than him. But I don't know who else are the other agents named in the Phoenix memo. I knew some of the names. I forgot over the many years. But yeah, I don't know all the names listed in the memo itself. And unfortunately, the names are redacted in the memo itself. So I don't know all the names. Like I said, apparently the FBI didn't do much with the memo, even though it was sent to roughly 13 people. None of them apparently sent it to the acting director, Thomas Picard. Director Mueller, who took over in September, concedes that the agency didn't act aggressively on the memo. Nobody took it seriously. And the memo was never shared with the CIA. So Joe Hill, yeah, the CIA was not involved with the Phoenix memo. And so nobody took action on it. Just like nobody took action on the Bajinka plot dossier that was shared from the Philippines to the FBI. That was also shared with the FAA. I found out later. Nobody took action. Nobody took action until it was much too late. September 11, 2001. Did these high-level people also have anything to do with the ignoring of the warnings of the 20th hijacker case? That's a pretty good question. I will assume that Ken Williams didn't know anything about Zacaria Soubra. You had Muhammad al-Qahtani, who was another alleged 20th hijacker that was arrested in Florida. He was actually tortured in Guantanamo. Moussaoui is actually the only person that was arrested and imprisoned for his role in 9/11 attacks. And he's currently in an underground prison at Adamak Supermax in Colorado. Nobody could get near him. So I would say that the ignored warnings of the Phoenix memo, a lot of them, well, Dave Frasca knew. He blocked the Pfizer. Actually, Dave Frasca is one of the men responsible for the blocking of the authorization or approval of a Pfizer warrant in regards to Moussaouy's laptops and personal belongings, because Moussaoui is not an American citizen. So, in other words, he's not, you can't get a warrant, a regular warrant authorized by a U.S. court to look at his belongings. You have to go what is called a FISA warrant, a Foreign Intelligence Services Affairs warrant, right? So, in other words, you have to go to a special court and it has to be approved by the superiors at the Radical Fundamentals Unit that basically say he's got a case. Hey, there's a connection. Why you want to look to his case? Oh, if there's a connection to terrorism, okay, we'll approve it. Now, according to Dave Frasca and Bob Bowman, who's a supervisor at the Radical Fundamentals Unit, they basically said, well, the wording used in this legat, this attaché, this FISA application is too loose. There's no connection to Moussaoui and terrorism. Meanwhile, there was. French authorities, where Moussaoui was from, faxed over a plethora of information showing that Moussaoui went to a mosque in Germany and France where it was led by a known radical preacher, Abu Hamza. Abu Hamza is currently doing life in prison inside the United States for his continued remarks about attacking U.S. targets. He actually has a hook for a hand. And so with that link, that right there, and I've interviewed Colleen Rowley, where she basically said that right there alone should be the amount for approval of a warrant. But the warrant wasn't approved, and nobody could look at the laptop until September 12th, 2001. Coincidence? I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, I think that's about it. If nobody has any other questions, we're at the 1 hour and 6 minute mark. And that is the story of Ken Williams and the Phoenix Memo. Ken Williams is basically a fantastic individual. Henry Allen, the late Henry Allen, deserves a lot of credit for giving that information, which led to the Phoenix Memo. And they both tried. And basically, it's not through the fault of their own. They really did try to bring attention to the burgeoning problem that started in the early 1990s about this radical fundamentalism that was existing in Phoenix, Scottsdale, and basically nobody acted on the information. So, through no fault of their own. And I just want to give a lot of credit to Ken Williams and credit to Henry Allen itself. And so I'll see you at the next live video. Hopefully that's soon. I have, like I said, I did an update video other day. I got some potential really blockbuster interviews coming up in the month of January and February. And so, I'll keep you updated. And like I said, a lot of information that I share with you tonight, I'll share with you, of course, in the description, the Office of Inspector General report, the Phoenix Memo, and my interview with Ken Williams. You can all view in the description. Guys, have a good night. I'll see you in the next stream.